Signal came through at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. It was weak and broken, barely cutting through the background noise of 1,000 star systems. But the message was clear enough. Someone was dying, and they were begging for help. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was finishing his night shift at the Terran Defense Network headquarters when the alert flashed across his screen. He sat up straight, his coffee forgotten as he listened to the translated message. The voice belonged to someone from the Velhari species, a race of tall reptilian beings known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful ways and beautiful crystal cities. "This is Velos Prime," the voice said, crackling with static. "We are under attack. The Kragath have come. Our defenses are gone. Our orbital stations are destroyed. Please, anyone who can hear this, we need help. We have children here, families. We have done nothing to deserve this, please." The message repeated 3 times, then cut off completely. Jake immediately forwarded the signal to his commanding officer and pulled up everything the database had on the Velhari and the Kragath. What he read made his blood run cold. The Velhari had no military to speak of. They were philosophers and artists, a species that had never known war on their own world. The Kragath, on the other hand, were nightmares made real. They were an insectoid swarm that consumed entire planets, stripping them of resources and leaving nothing but dead rocks behind. Within an hour, the message had reached the Galactic Council. Jake watched the emergency session through a secure feed. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the vast chamber, their forms ranging from humanoid to beings of pure energy. They argued and debated while precious minutes ticked away. "We cannot risk our forces," said the Zenthari representative, a proud avian species with shimmering feathers. "The Kragath are too dangerous. If we engage them, they might turn their attention to our worlds next." "The Velhari are council members," another voice protested. "We have a duty to protect them." "A duty, yes, but not a suicide mission. Our fleet is scattered across the galaxy. It would take weeks to gather enough ships to face the Kragath swarm." The debate went on and on. Jake felt his frustration growing with each passing minute. These beings were scared, and he understood why. The Kragath had destroyed civilizations before, but fear was no excuse for leaving innocent people to die. He was about to turn away from the feed when Admiral Helen Crawford walked into the command center. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had served in the Earth Defense Force for 30 years and had personally overseen humanity's integration into the galactic community. "You heard the signal?" she asked Jake. "Yes, ma'am. The council is still debating what to do." Crawford's expression hardened. "How long would it take us to reach Velos Prime?" Jake pulled up the navigation data. "With our fastest ships and pushing the gravity drives to maximum, about 18 hours. "And the Kragath? How long until they completely overrun the planet?" "Intelligence estimates the Velhari have maybe 2 days at most. Probably less." Crawford nodded slowly, her mind clearly working through the implications. Then she picked up a secure communication device and made a call. Jake could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was enough. "Mr. President, we have a situation." "Yes, sir." "I know humanity isn't required to respond." "No, sir, the Council hasn't authorized any action. But with respect, sir, when did we start waiting for permission to do the right thing?" There was a long pause. Jake held his breath. "Thank you, Mr. President. We'll make you proud." Crawford turned to Jake with fire in her eyes. "Get me Captain Lucas Bennett of the EDS Valiant. Tell him to prepare the 5th Expeditionary Fleet for immediate departure. Full combat loadout. We're going to war." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The 5th Fleet consisted of 3 heavy cruisers, 7 destroyers, and 2 carrier groups loaded with atmospheric fighters. Nearly 8,000 human personnel were suddenly mobilized, pulling on armor and checking weapons while ship crews ran through pre-flight sequences. Jake found himself assigned to the Valiant as tactical coordinator. As he boarded the massive warship, he couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and fear. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for 15 years. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most hostile planets ever discovered. Most alien species looked at humans with barely concealed nervousness. They had heard stories about Earth's predators, its diseases, its weather patterns that could kill unprepared visitors in minutes. And now these same nervous aliens were about to see what Deathworlders could do when someone needed help. Captain Lucas Bennett was a tall man with dark skin and eyes that missed nothing. He stood on the bridge of the Valiant, watching as his fleet assembled in formation around the flagship. When the last ship reported ready, he gave the order. All ships engage gravity drives. Maximum speed to Velos Prime. We're not waiting for the Council to make up their minds. The fleet lurched into motion, tearing through normal space and entering the strange realm of faster-than-light travel. Through the viewports, stars stretched into lines of light. Down in the Marine Bay, Sergeant Nina Hayes was briefing her company on what they knew about the Kragath. She was a compact woman with sharp features and more combat experience than most people twice her age. Her Marines listened carefully as she brought up images on the display screen. The Kragath are bugs, she said bluntly. Big bugs. Some of them are the size of a car. They have armor plating that can stop most standard weapons, and they fight in swarms. They don't take prisoners, they don't negotiate, and they don't stop coming until everything is dead. One of her Marines, a young private named Danny Wright, raised his hand. Sarge, why are we doing this? I mean, the Velhari aren't our allies or anything. We barely know them. Nina looked at him steadily. Because they asked for help, right? Because they have families and children, just like we do. And because if we don't stand up for people who can't defend themselves, then what the hell are we good for? The young Marine nodded, looking slightly embarrassed, but also determined. Jake watched the briefing from the observation deck and felt something settle in his chest. This was why he had joined the Defense Force. Not to conquer or to prove humanity's strength, but to make a difference when it mattered most. Admiral Crawford's voice came through the ship-wide communication system. All personnel, this is Admiral Crawford. In about 17 hours, we're going to drop out of faster-than-light travel right in the middle of a war zone. The odds are not in our favor. The Kragath outnumber us significantly, and we're operating without support from the Galactic Council. She paused, letting that sink in. But here's what the Kragath don't know about us. They don't know that humans come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. They don't know that we evolved by fighting and surviving against impossible odds. They don't know that we have a very simple rule. We don't abandon people who need our help. Another pause. The Velhari are counting on someone to answer their call. The galaxy thinks they're doomed. Let's show everyone what happens when you mess with innocent people while Deathworlders are around. Crawford out. The ship erupted in cheers. Jake felt his heart pounding with anticipation. In less than a day, they would either save an entire civilization or die trying. He pulled up the distress signal one more time and listened to the desperate plea. The Velhari voice sounded so frightened, so hopeless. Jake made a silent promise to that unknown voice. We're coming. Just hold on a little longer. The human fleet raced through the stars, carrying hope to a world that had almost given up. Behind them, Earth waited anxiously for news. And ahead, the Kragath swarm continued its destruction, unaware that something was coming. Something angry. Something that had learned long ago that the strong must protect the weak, no matter the cost. The distress signal had echoed through the stars, and the Deathworlders were responding in force. Part 2. First Contact with Horror. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velo system, and everyone on the bridge of the Valiant fell silent. What they saw through the viewports was worse than any intelligence report could have prepared them for. Velos Prime hung in space like a wounded animal. The planet's beautiful blue and green surface was marred by dozens of fires visible even from orbit. What had once been elegant orbital stations were now twisted wreckage, slowly tumbling through the void. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were Kragath bioships. Captain Lucas Bennett stood frozen for just a moment, taking in the sight. The Kragath vessels looked nothing like normal spacecraft. They were alive, pulsing with sickly bioluminescent light that made them look like deep-sea creatures dragged up from an ocean trench. Some were small, barely larger than fighters. Others were massive, the size of small moons, their surfaces crawling with what looked like organic weapons. Count, Bennett said quietly. Jake Morrison worked frantically at his station, his fingers flying across the controls. I'm reading over 300 vessels, sir. Multiple classes. They've formed a blockade around the planet. Nothing's getting in or out. Communications Officer Amy Cooper suddenly spoke up, her voice tight. Sir, I'm picking up something. It's weak, but there's a signal coming from the surface. Someone's still transmitting. Put it through, Bennett ordered. The speakers crackled to life. A voice speaking the Velhari language came through. The ship's translator system kicked in, rendering the words in English. This is Sovereign Kelthus of Velos Prime. If anyone can hear this, we are in the underground shelters beneath the capital city. The Kragath have destroyed everything above ground. We have perhaps 20,000 survivors here. We have wounded. We have children. We cannot hold much longer. Please, if anyone is listening. Bennett grabbed a microphone. Sovereign Kelthus, this is Captain Lucas Bennett of the Earth Defense Ship Valiant. We received your distress call. We're here to help. There was a long silence. Then the Velhari voice came back, filled with confusion and disbelief. Earth, the human world? But you are so far away, and your people you are. Forgive me, but you are Deathworlders. Why would you come? Jake found himself speaking before he could stop himself. Because you asked for help. That's all the reason we need. Another pause. Then the Velhari voice spoke again, and this time there was something like hope in it. How many ships did you bring? How many does the Galactic Council send? Bennett and Jake exchanged a look. The captain's expression was grim as he answered. The Galactic Council is still debating. It's just us, Sovereign. The 5th Human Expeditionary Fleet. We're going to get you out of there. The Velhari's response was almost a whisper. Just you? But there are hundreds of Kragath ships. This is a suicide mission for you. Maybe, Bennett acknowledged. But we're pretty good at impossible situations. Hold tight, we're coming down. He cut the connection and turned to his crew. All ships battle stations. Tactical, give me everything we know about Kragath combat doctrine. Jake pulled up the files, his mind racing. Sir, they fight in swarms. They overwhelm enemies with numbers. Their bioships can regenerate damage, and they don't fear death because they're controlled by a hive mind. They've never encountered an opponent that fights back with our level of technology. Good, Bennett said with a cold smile. Then they're in for a surprise. Launch all fighters. Prepare drop pods for immediate deployment. And someone get me Admiral Crawford. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen. She was aboard the heavy cruiser Perseus, leading the 2nd battle group. Captain, I see what we're up against. It's not good. No, ma'am. But it never is. I'm recommending we split our forces. You take the Perseus group and engage the Kragath fleet in orbit. Draw them away from the planet. The Valiant group will punch through their lines and make for the surface. We'll establish a defensive perimeter around the Velhari survivors. Crawford nodded. It's risky, but it's our best shot. We'll make so much noise up here that they won't be able to ignore us. Good luck, Captain. You too, Admiral. See you on the other side. The channel closed. Bennett took a deep breath and gave the order that would commit them all to battle. All ships engage. The human fleet split into 2 groups and accelerated toward the Kragath swarm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Kragath vessels began to move, slowly reorienting toward the approaching humans. They were clearly confused. These small ships were attacking? It made no sense to the hive mind. That confusion lasted exactly as long as it took for the first human weapons to fire. The Perseus opened up with its main cannons, and the results were devastating. Where most galactic species used energy weapons that were precise but relatively weak, humans had stuck with kinetic weaponry enhanced by their advanced technology. Solid projectiles moving at a significant fraction of light speed hit the Kragath bioships and tore through them like they were made of paper. The Kragath responded immediately, their bioships surging forward in a massive swarm. But they moved according to patterns established over thousands of years of warfare against opponents who fought by galactic rules. Humans, as it turned out, didn't know those rules and wouldn't have cared if they did. Admiral Crawford's group performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. The ships pulled acceleration that would have killed most alien crews, their inertial dampeners working overtime to keep the humans conscious. They dove and weaved through the Kragath formations, firing constantly, never staying still long enough for the bioships to coordinate their attacks. Meanwhile, Captain Bennett led the Valiant straight toward the planet. Kragath vessels moved to intercept, but the human destroyers cleared a path with devastating efficiency. One destroyer, the Hammer, took heavy damage from Kragath acid spitters but kept fighting, its crew refusing to break off even as sections of their ship were eaten away by the corrosive biological weapons. Approaching atmosphere, Jake reported. We've got a clear lane for the next 90 seconds. Then we don't waste a second. All drop pods launch now. Down in the Marine Bay, Sergeant Nina Hayes felt her drop pod seal shut around her. She was crammed in with 5 other Marines, all of them loaded down with weapons and ammunition. The pod was a simple metal shell with basic heat shielding and minimal guidance systems. Most alien species considered them barbaric and dangerous. Humans called them efficient. 30 seconds to launch. the automated system announced. "Atmospheric entry will be rough. Brace for high G insertion." Nina grinned at her squad. "Last one to the surface buys drinks when we get home." Then they were falling. The pod shot out of the Valiant's launch tube and immediately began plummeting toward Velhos Prime. Through the small viewport, Nina could see hundreds of other pods falling alongside hers. A rain of metal death heading for the planet's surface. The entry was violent. The pod shook so hard that Nina's teeth rattled. The heat shielding glowed red, then white. Any normal person would have been unconscious from the G-forces. But humans had evolved on a heavy gravity world, and their bodies could take punishment that would kill most aliens. They hit the ground like a meteor strike. The impact crater was 10 feet deep. The pod's front section blew away, and Nina and her squad stumbled out, weapons ready. They were in what had once been a beautiful city square. Now it was a battlefield. The crystal buildings that the Velhari were famous for lay in ruins. Bodies lay scattered among the rubble, both Velhari and Kragath. And everywhere there were bugs. The Kragath warriors were even uglier up close than in the briefing images. They stood 7 feet tall on 4 legs with 2 more limbs that ended in razor-sharp claws. Their heads were mostly mouth, filled with teeth like broken glass. And they were fast, so terrifyingly fast. A group of them spotted the humans and charged. They let out a sound like metal scraping on metal, a war cry that had frozen the blood of 100 species. Nina Hayes raised her rifle and opened fire. The weapon was a Gauss rifle, accelerating metal slugs to hypersonic velocities. It had been designed to stop charging rhinos and angry bears on Earth. It worked just fine on alien bugs. The first Kragath exploded as the slug punched through its armor plating and liquefied its insides. The second and third fell before they'd closed half the distance. The rest of the swarm kept coming because fear wasn't something the hive mind understood. By the time the firefight was over, 30 seconds later, dozens of Kragath lay dead or dying. Nina's squad had lost no one, though Private Danny Wright had a nasty cut on his arm where a claw had gotten too close. "Welcome to Velhos Prime," Nina muttered, reloading her weapon. "Let's find those civilians." All around the ruined city, similar scenes were playing out as human marines secured landing zones and pushed back Kragath forces. The bugs had never encountered anything like this. These creatures from the death world didn't break and run. They didn't freeze in terror. They fought with a cold efficiency that came from thousands of generations of evolution on a planet where everything wanted to eat you. Jake watched the tactical display from the Valiants. Bridge's human forces established a defensive perimeter around the underground shelters. Captain Bennett was coordinating with ground commanders, directing orbital fire support onto Kragath concentrations. Part 3. The siege, the Kragath response came at dawn on the second day. The hive mind had analyzed the human tactics, studied their weapons, and concluded that these newcomers represented a serious threat. The decision was made to commit overwhelming force. Every Kragath vessel in the system began moving toward Velhos Prime. Admiral Helen Crawford watched from the bridge of the Perseus as her tactical display lit up with red contacts. "How many?" she asked quietly. "All of them," Jake Morrison replied from his position on the Valiant. "Every single bioship in the system is converging on our position. We're looking at a full hive assault." Crawford's jaw tightened. They had known this might happen. The humans had hurt the Kragath badly in the initial engagement, destroyed dozens of their vessels and rescued the Velhari survivors. The hive mind couldn't allow such a defeat to stand. Now it was going to throw everything at them in one massive attack. "All ships, this is Crawford. Tighten formation around the planet. Overlap point defense zones. Conserve ammunition and make every shot count. We're about to get hit by everything they have." On the surface, Sergeant Nina Hayes was reinforcing the defensive perimeter. When she got the word, she looked up at the sky, which was starting to fill with descending bioships. There were so many of them that they were blocking out the sun. "Well," she said to her squad, "this is going to be interesting." The massive Kragath hive ships began entering the atmosphere, their organic hulls glowing from the heat. Each one carried thousands of warrior drones. The plan was clear: flood the surface with so many Kragath that the humans would be overwhelmed through sheer numbers. It was a strategy that had worked on dozens of worlds. The humans had other ideas. Captain Lucas Bennett coordinated the defense from orbit. As the hive ships descended, he ordered every human vessel to target them with everything they had. Missiles streaked through the atmosphere, nuclear warheads detonating in brilliant flashes of light. The explosions were massive, tearing apart the closest bioships and sending debris raining down across the landscape. Most galactic species had banned nuclear weapons thousands of years ago, considering them too barbaric and indiscriminate. Humans had simply made them more precise and devastating. When you came from a death world, you learned to use every advantage you had. But for every hive ship that was destroyed, 2 more made it through. They crashed into the surface around the Velhari capital, and their cargo holds opened like flowers blooming, releasing wave after wave of Kragath warriors. Nina watched them come. There were thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They moved like a living carpet, scuttling over the rubble and rushing toward the human defensive lines. She raised her rifle and started firing, her squad doing the same. The Gauss rifles were designed for long-range precision, but they worked just fine for mass targets. Every shot killed or crippled a Kragath, but for every one that fell, 3 more took its place. The bugs just kept coming, climbing over their own dead without hesitation. "Fall back to secondary positions," Nina ordered. "Fighting retreat. Keep them in the kill zones." The Marines pulled back in good order, firing constantly. The Kragath followed exactly as planned. When the bugs entered the streets between the ruined crystal buildings, the real killing began. Hidden explosive charges detonated, bringing down entire structures on top of the Kragath swarms. Pre-positioned machine gun nests opened fire from elevated positions, cutting down hundreds of bugs in seconds. Private Danny Wright found himself separated from his squad when part of a building collapsed between them. He was alone in a narrow alley with at least a dozen Kragath warriors scuttling toward him. For a moment, pure fear gripped him. Then his training kicked in. He emptied his rifle's magazine into the closest bugs, dropped the weapon, and pulled out his sidearm. The pistol barked 3 times, dropping more Kragath. When a warrior got close enough to strike with its claws, Danny dove aside and grabbed a piece of twisted metal rebar from the rubble. He swung it like a club, the improvised weapon crunching into the bug's head with satisfying force. More Kragath poured into the alley. Danny's pistol was empty. He was exhausted, bleeding from multiple small cuts and probably going to die. But he had promised himself that he would protect the Velhari civilians in the shelter below, and he meant to keep that promise. He raised the metal bar and prepared for his last stand. Then gunfire erupted from above. Nina Hayes and 2 other Marines were on a nearby rooftop, their rifles making short work of the Kragath in the alley. Nina rappelled down and grabbed Danny by his armor. "Move, Private." "We're not done yet." They ran through the ruins as more buildings collapsed behind them, burying Kragath under tons of crystal and stone. The battle was brutal and chaotic, but the humans were holding. Barely. In the underground shelter, Sovereign Kelthis listened to the sounds of combat echoing from above. The Velhari elder was tall even for his species, with scales that had once been brilliant green but were now dulled by stress and fear. Around him, his people huddled in the darkness, mothers holding their young, the elderly trying to comfort the frightened. Jake Morrison had come down to the shelter to coordinate directly with the Velhari leadership. He stood beside Kelthis, studying a holographic map of the battle. "Your people fight well," Kelthis said quietly, "but there are so many Kragath. How long can you hold?" Jake didn't lie to him. "I don't know. Days, maybe. Maybe less. We're taking casualties. We're running low on ammunition for some weapon systems. If the Kragath keep this pressure up, eventually they'll break through. Then why do you continue? You could evacuate now, save your own people. No one would blame you for retreating." Jake looked at the Velhari elder for a long moment. "My grandmother told me a story when I was young. She said that humans spent thousands of years fighting each other. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once. But eventually we learned something important. We learned that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. Not because we'll get something out of it. Not because it's easy, but because it's right." Kelthis's eyes, large and golden, seemed to shine in the dim light. "Your people are strange. Violent and gentle at the same time. Frightening and noble. I do not fully understand you, but I am grateful you came." An explosion above them shook dust from the ceiling. Jake checked his communication device and saw that the Kragath were pushing hard against the eastern defensive line. He needed to get back to the Valiant and coordinate orbital support. "Keep your people safe down here," Jake said. "We'll hold the line. I promise." "I believe you," Kelthis replied, "though I do not know why. Perhaps because you Deathworlders do not know how to give up. Jake smiled grimly. That's about right. He left the shelter and made his way back to the surface where the battle continued to rage. Communications Officer Amy Cooper managed to hack into Kragath bioelectric signals, giving the humans real-time intelligence on enemy movements. It was dangerous work, the alien signals giving her splitting headaches, but the advantage was worth it. I'm tracking a major concentration building on the north side, she reported to Bennett. Looks like they're preparing for a coordinated push. Colonel Grant, you hearing this? Bennett asked. Colonel Peter Grant's voice came through, slightly out of breath. He was on the ground with a special operations team, fighting in the ruins. Confirmed, sir. We can see them gathering. There must be 5,000 bugs forming up. Can you get targeting beacons on them? That's a negative, sir. We'd have to get right in the middle of them to plant beacons, and we wouldn't make it back out. Bennett was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he made a decision. Do it anyway. Get as close as you can. Plant the beacons, and we'll bring hell down on them. Danger close fire support. Sir, I know what it is, Colonel. But if that swarm hits our lines, they'll break through. We need to stop them before they attack. There was a pause. Then Grant replied, Understood, sir. We're moving now. Jake watched his display as Grant's team began infiltrating toward the Kragath concentration. They moved like ghosts through the ruins, avoiding patrols and silently eliminating any bugs that got too close. It took them an hour to get into position, an hour during which every person on the human command staff held their breath. Beacons planted. Grant finally reported. Getting out now. Fire mission incoming, Bennett said. All ships target coordinates transmitted. Launch everything. Every human ship in orbit opened fire simultaneously. Missiles and kinetic projectiles rained down on the Kragath concentration. The explosions were so massive that they registered on seismic sensors across the planet. When the fire mission ended, that entire section of the city was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. Colonel Grant and his team made it out with seconds to spare, the shockwave from the bombardment knocking them off their feet even though they were a safe distance away. The Kragath assault faltered. The hive mind had lost thousands of warriors in seconds, and even its alien intelligence recognized that this tactic wasn't working. The bugs pulled back slightly, regrouping, but everyone on the human side knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The Kragath would come again, and next time they would adapt to human tactics. The siege would continue. As the second day turned into the second night, Admiral Crawford received a message from Earth. The Galactic Council had finally voted on Part 4, Death World Fury. The breakthrough came on the third day when Communications Officer Amy Cooper made a discovery while monitoring Kragath bioelectric signals. She had been tracking the patterns for hours, her head throbbing from the alien frequencies, when she noticed something important. Captain Bennett, I think I've found something, she said, her voice tight with excitement and pain. The Kragath aren't acting independently. All these signals are coming from a central source. There's a hive queen somewhere in this system, and she's coordinating everything. Captain Lucas Bennett leaned forward in his command chair. Where? Amy worked frantically at her station, filtering through thousands of signals. There, that massive bioship on the edge of the system. It's 3 times larger than any other vessel. The signals are all originating from there and spreading out to the rest of the swarm. Jake Morrison pulled up the target on his display. The Queen's ship was enormous, easily 5 kilometers long. It looked less like a spacecraft and more like a living island floating in space. Its surface was covered in organic weapons and pulsing with that same sickly bioluminescence that marked all Kragath vessels. If we kill the Queen, Jake said slowly, the hive mind might collapse. It's a theory, Bennett agreed. But we don't know for sure what would happen. The swarm might go berserk, or they might retreat, or nothing might change at all. But it's a chance, Admiral Helen Crawford's voice came through from the Perseus. She had been listening to the discussion. Right now, we're slowly losing this fight. We need to change the game. I say we go for the Queen. Bennett nodded slowly. It would take most of our fleet to punch through to that ship. We'd be leaving the ground forces with minimal orbital support. We can hold. Sergeant Nina Hayes' voice cut in from the surface. Do what you need to do, sir. We'll keep these bugs off the civilians. The decision was made. Admiral Crawford would lead the assault on the Queen's ship with most of the fleet. Only 2 destroyers would remain in orbit to provide limited fire support for the ground forces. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was something humans understood well. The attack fleet formed up and began accelerating toward the Queen's ship. The Kragath response was immediate. Bioships moved to intercept, forming a defensive screen around their queen. The space between the human fleet and their target filled with enemy vessels. All ships weapons free, Crawford ordered. Clear us a path. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Human ships moved with impossible precision, executing maneuvers that should have torn them apart. They dove through Kragath formations, fired at point-blank range, and kept moving before the enemy could respond. Lieutenant Sophie Martin led her fighter wing directly into the teeth of the Kragath defenses. Her squadron flew in tight formation, their small craft weaving between the massive bioships like angry wasps. They drew fire away from the larger human vessels, sacrificing their own safety to protect the ships that carried the assault teams. Sophie's fighter took hits from Kragath acid spitters, the corrosive biological weapon eating through her hull plating. She held course anyway, lining up a shot on a cluster of Kragath point defense nodes. Her missiles launched, destroying the nodes and clearing a path for the assault shuttles behind her. "Sophie, your ship is falling apart," her wingman called out. "Break off." "Negative," Sophie replied calmly, even as her control systems began failing. "The mission comes first. Keep the path clear." She held her dying fighter on course for another 30 seconds, drawing more fire, buying more time. When her ship finally broke apart, she ejected at the last moment, her escape pod tumbling through space. Her sacrifice had worked. The assault shuttles made it through. Captain Bennett personally led the boarding party. 20 shuttles, each carrying 30 Marines in full combat armor, streaked toward the Queen's ship. The bioship's defenses tore apart 5 of the shuttles, killing everyone aboard. The remaining 15 slammed into the Queen's hull at high speed, their breaching charges detonating and blowing holes through the organic armor. Bennett and his Marines poured into the ship and immediately found themselves in hell. The interior was a nightmare of organic corridors that pulsed like living tissue. The atmosphere was barely breathable, thick with spores and biological agents that would have killed most species in minutes. The humans, with their overbuilt immune systems, could survive it, though it made them sick. Kragath warriors swarmed out of the walls themselves, scuttling along the ceiling and floor. The Marines opened fire, their weapons lighting up the dark corridors with muzzle flashes. The fighting was brutal in close quarters, exactly the kind of combat that humans had evolved to excel at. Sergeant Victor Kane led his team deeper into the ship, following Amy Cooper's guidance from the Valiant. She was tracking the Queen's bioelectric signature, directing the assault teams toward their target. 200 meters ahead, then down 3 levels, Amy said, her voice strained. The alien signals were so strong this close to the Queen that they were giving her nosebleeds. "You're almost there." Kane's team fought through wave after wave of defenders. These weren't the standard Kragath warriors they had been fighting on the surface. These were elite guards, larger and faster, with armor plating that could actually stop some rounds. One of Kane's Marines, a woman named Lisa Ford, took a claw strike to her chest. Her armor held, but she was thrown back against a wall hard enough to crack ribs. She got back up and kept fighting. That was what Deathworlders did. On the planet's surface, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. With most of the orbital fire support gone, the Kragath were pressing their advantage. Nina Hayes and her company were falling back toward the shelter entrance, fighting every step of the way. Private Danny Wright saw a group of Kragath warriors break through their lines and head straight for the shelter entrance. If they got inside, thousands of Vilhari civilians would die. He didn't think. He just acted. Danny charged forward, putting himself between the bugs and the entrance. His rifle was empty, so he used it as a club, smashing it into the head of the lead Kragath. The weapon broke, and a claw caught him in the side, tearing through his armor and into flesh. He fell but managed to pull a grenade from his belt. He triggered it and threw it into the middle of the Kragath group. The explosion killed the bugs but also caught Danny in the blast radius. Nina reached him seconds later, dragging him away from the still burning bodies. He was badly hurt, bleeding heavily from multiple wounds. "Medic!" Nina screamed. "Get me a medic now." "The civilians," Danny gasped. "Are they safe?" "They're safe, you idiot," Nina said, her voice breaking. "You saved them. Now stay with me. That's an order." Deep inside the Queen's ship, Captain Bennett and his team finally reached the central chamber. It was massive, the size of a cathedral, and in the center was the Queen herself. She was enormous, her bloated body pulsing with bioluminescent organs. Cables of living tissue connected her to every part of the ship, allowing her to coordinate the entire Kragath swarm in this sector. Around her were dozens of elite guards, the largest and most dangerous Kragath the humans had encountered yet. The guards attacked immediately, and the firefight that followed pushed the human assault team to their absolute limits. Lieutenant Rachel Foster, Bennett's second-in-command, took multiple hits covering her captain's advance. She kept firing even as her armor failed. Even as alien claws tore into her, she bought Bennett the seconds he needed to reach the Queen. Bennett planted explosive charges directly onto the Queen's massive body, setting the timer for 30 seconds. Then he grabbed Rachel and started pulling her toward the exit. The remaining Marines covered their retreat, fighting like demons to keep the Kragath guards at bay. They almost made it out. Rachel died 3 meters from the extraction point, her wounds finally too much even for her enhanced Death Worlder body. Bennett wanted to carry her body out, but there was no time. The charges were about to blow. The assault teams evacuated the Queen's ship in their shuttles, leaving behind dozens of their dead. 10 seconds later, the charges detonated deep inside the Queen's body. The explosion tore through her massive form, destroying the central nexus of the hive mind in this sector. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across the system, Kragath bioships suddenly lost coordination. Some continued attacking but without any strategy. Others simply stopped moving as if their pilots had fallen asleep. On the planet's surface, the Kragath warriors that had been pressing Nina's company suddenly became confused and disorganized. "They're breaking," one of the Marines shouted. "The bugs are pulling back." Nina didn't celebrate. She was kneeling beside Danny Wright, holding pressure on his wounds while a medic worked frantically to stabilize him. The young private was still conscious, barely, looking up at her with eyes that were starting to lose focus. "Did we win, Sarge?" he whispered. "Yeah, kid, we won. You made the difference. Those civilians are alive because of you." Danny smiled weakly. "Good. That's good." In orbit, Admiral Crawford watched as the remaining Kragath bioships began jumping away, fleeing the system in disarray. The human fleet had taken heavy casualties. 7 ships were badly damaged and 3 had been destroyed completely. But they had done the impossible. They had defeated the Kragath swarm. The Galactic Council's relief fleet arrived in the Velho system like guests showing up after the party was over. Admiral Helen Crawford watched their ships take up positions around the planet, their pristine hulls unmarked by battle. Her own fleet looked like it had been through a meat grinder, which was more or less accurate. The Council fleet commander, a Xanthari admiral named Corvin, requested a meeting aboard the Valiant. Captain Lucas Bennett reluctantly agreed, though he was in no mood for diplomatic pleasantries. When Corvin arrived, his feathers were perfectly groomed and his uniform spotless. He looked around the Valiant's bridge with barely concealed distaste at the damage and bloodstains. "Captain Bennett," Corvin began in his high, musical voice, "I must say your tactics were extremely reckless. Charging into a battle against overwhelming odds using nuclear weapons, conducting boarding actions on a hive ship. Such barbaric methods are beneath civilized species." Bennett stared at him for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze helium. "Admiral Corvin, while you and the Council were debating in your comfortable chambers, we were here bleeding and dying to save innocent people. We lost 2,000 personnel in this battle. Good people who volunteered to help strangers. So please, enlighten me about civilization while standing on a deck that's still stained with their blood." Corvin seemed taken aback by the hostility. "I merely meant that there are proper protocols for these situations. The Council was assembling a proper response force, which would have arrived 2 days too late. The Velhari would be dead or enslaved by now if they had waited for your proper protocols." Bennett stepped closer to the Xanthari admiral. "We're not here to follow your rules or get your approval. We're here because people needed help, and no one else would answer the call. If that makes us barbaric in your eyes, I can live with that." Jake Morrison watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and concern. The relationship between humanity and the Galactic Council had always been complicated. This battle wasn't going to make things any easier. But part of him didn't care. They had done the right thing, and that mattered more than politics. Down on the planet's surface, human medics were working alongside Velhari healers to treat the wounded. The cultural exchange was remarkable. Velhari physicians were amazed by human resilience. Injuries that would be fatal to their species were survivable for humans. Private Danny Wright, despite taking wounds that should have killed him, was stable and expected to recover. He lay in a medical tent surrounded by Velhari younglings he had saved. They didn't speak English and he didn't speak their language, but somehow they communicated anyway. He taught them simple Earth songs, and they responded with beautiful harmonizing sounds that their species was famous for. For a moment, the horror of the battle seemed far away. Sergeant Nina Hayes found them like that. The human soldier and the alien children singing together in the ruins of their city. She felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension that had been there since the first shot was fired. This was why they had come. This moment right here made everything worth it. Sovereign Keltis emerged from the underground shelter for the first time since the battle ended. He stood in the sunlight looking at his destroyed capital city. Tears ran down his scaled face as he surveyed the devastation. Everything his people had built over centuries was gone. Then he saw the human Marines working to clear rubble and help survivors. He saw human medics treating Velhari wounded with the same care they showed their own. He saw species that had every reason to see his people as weak or unworthy, instead treating them with respect and compassion. He found Captain Bennett supervising the recovery efforts. The human captain looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and dried blood on his uniform. Keltis approached him slowly. "Captain Bennett, I wanted to thank you personally. My people owe you a debt we can never repay." Bennett shook his head. "You don't owe us anything, Sovereign. We did what anyone should do when someone asks for help. But not everyone did," Keltis pointed out. "The council debated while we died. Only humanity answered our call." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Before this, we Velhari believed that true civilization meant transcending violence. We thought that peace came from refusing to fight, from avoiding conflict at all costs. We were wrong." "You weren't wrong to want peace," Bennett said. "Peace is worth wanting. But sometimes peace has to be defended." "Yes," Keltis agreed. "Your people have taught us a hard lesson. That sometimes the strong must be willing to fight to protect the weak. That civilization isn't about avoiding all conflict, but about knowing what is worth fighting for." He looked at the human captain with his large golden eyes. "You come from a world that tried to kill you. Your evolution was shaped by constant struggle, and yet you use that strength not to conquer, but to protect. That is true nobility." The words hung in the air between them. All around, humans and Velhari worked side by side to rebuild what could be rebuilt and honor what was lost. A memorial service was held 3 days after the battle. The Velhari created it using their remaining crystal-shaping technology. The memorial was a beautiful structure that caught the sunlight and split it into rainbows. At its center was a statue of a human Marine carrying a Velhari child to safety, rendered in perfect detail. The names of all the human dead were inscribed on the walls, over 2,000 names in total. Lieutenant Rachel Foster, Lieutenant Sophie Martin, Private Lisa Ford, and hundreds more. Each name represented a person who had chosen to risk everything for strangers. Captain Bennett stood before the memorial and read the names aloud one by one. It took hours. Behind him, the surviving human personnel stood at attention, honoring their fallen comrades. The Velhari stood with them, their musical voices joining in as they learned to pronounce the human names. When the ceremony ended, Sovereign Keltis added an inscription in both languages. It read simply, "They came from a world that tried to kill them at every moment. They came from a species forged in fire and hardship. They came when no one else would. They came because we called." Jake Morrison stood looking at the memorial as the sun set on Velos Prime. He thought about all the people who had died, all the sacrifices made. He wondered if they had really made a difference, or if the galaxy would forget this battle in a year or two. His thoughts were interrupted by a communication from Admiral Crawford. "Jake, we're getting reports from other sectors. The Kragath aren't done. They're hitting other worlds. Multiple species are sending out distress calls." "Is the Council responding?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "They're debating. Forming committees. You know how it goes." Crawford paused. "But we're getting direct requests for help. Species that heard what we did here. They're specifically asking for human assistance." Jake felt something settle in his chest, a sense of purpose. "What are our orders, Admiral?" "The President has authorized us to respond to any distress calls we can reach. We'll get repairs and reinforcements, then head to the next crisis. If people need help, we're going to be there." "Understood, ma'am. When do we leave?" "Soon, but first make sure our people get some rest. They've earned it." Jake ended the call and looked back at the memorial. All those names, all those sacrifices, and now they were going to do it again. Go into danger for more strangers, risk more lives to save people they'd never met. But that was what humanity did. That was what separated them from species who only protected their own. The strong had a duty to defend the weak, no matter where they came from or what species they belonged to. Nina Hayes found him standing there. Her arm was in a sling from a wound she'd taken in the final hours of the battle, but she was already cleared for duty. "Heard we're shipping out soon," she said. "More people need help." "Yeah, you okay with that?" Nina smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "Sarge, I signed up to make a difference. We did that here. If we can do it somewhere else, then that's what we should do." Private Danny Wright joined them, limping slightly but refusing to use a crutch. The Velhari younglings he'd saved followed him like ducklings, not wanting to let their hero out of their sight. He looked embarrassed by the attention but also pleased. "Are we really leaving?" he asked. "There's still so much to do here." "The Council Relief Fleet will handle the rebuilding," Jake explained. "We're needed elsewhere. The Kragath are still out there, still attacking innocent worlds, and when people call for help, we answer." Danny nodded slowly. Then he knelt down and hugged the Velhari younglings goodbye. They made soft musical sounds of sadness but also gratitude. One of them gave him a small crystal shaped like a star. He tucked it carefully into his pocket. A week later, the human fleet departed Velos Prime. The ships were patched up and rearmed. New crews had arrived to replace those lost in battle. The fleet was ready to fight again. As they lifted away from the planet, every Velhari who could do so gathered in the public spaces of their ruined capital. They activated bioluminescent crystals, creating a display of light that was visible from orbit. It was their way of saying thank you, a gesture that transcended language and species. On the bridge of the Valiant, Captain Bennett watched the display.